or a public service broadcaster. Please welcome on stage Miss Natasha Mercure, Senior Director, Première Directrice for Audio Digital and Strategy for Radio-Canada in Montreal. Christelle Massé, Senior Director and Head of Marketing and Distribution for Radio France. And Christian Schalt, Chief Digital Officer for RTL Radio Group in Germany. Natasha, you'll have the luck to open this session, and I'm very happy to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm Natasha Mercure, Senior Director of Digital Audio Content and Strategy at Radio-Canada, the French language service of the Canadian public broadcaster. As you probably know, there are 8 million Francophones in Canada, a small minority in a sea of English speakers in North America. This means we have a special, somewhat protected market. Our audience is really attached to French content and local celebrities. As the national public broadcaster, it is an important part of our mandate to promote French content, both for Quebec's French-speaking majority and for Francophones community in the rest of Canada. This unique context is a key factor in our positioning. Just over 2 years ago, we decided to centralize all of our audio content under a new brand, Radio-Canada Audio. This means our goal was simple, is to be the listening destination for French-speaking Canadians. We also wanted to solve 2 problems. First, we wanted to make sure we were in control of the relationship with our listeners. Second, we want control over consumers' data so we could have a better and essential understanding of their needs and listening habits. Launching Radio-Canada Audio also meant a new website and application. When I refer to our audio content, I mean everything. Live and on-demand radio programs, a concert, music playlist, audiobooks, and of course, our original podcasts. It is important to note that until this change, we could not claim to have a unique listening destination for our audience. Our content was widely distributed on external platforms owned by industry giants, Apple Podcasts in particular, without monetization. How could we create an audio destination for the public broadcaster? Have a direct link with our listeners, and have complete control over our consumers' data. How to move forward when our audience's listening habits were well established on external platforms, where there was already a totally open and decentralized audio consumption, and when, even within our organization, habits would be hard to change. We had to ask ourselves what our distinctive value were compared to those major platforms. What would make people want to turn to Radio-Canada for French language content? It didn't take us long to find some answers. Our first selling point is quality content. We offer a wide selection of popular live and on-demand radio shows. We also offer music playlists, audiobook, concert, and unique archival content. Our second selling point is original podcasts. This format, which emerged in French-speaking Canada 2 or 3 years ago, is growing in popularity. Podcasts are our main content vector for reaching new listeners. Our third selling point is curation, the editorial choices we make to guide our listeners through the thousands of French content offered around the world. All of this on a free, accessible platform with original content from the Canadian public broadcaster, along with a wide selection of quality independent podcasts. Over time, we decided to create a completely new broadcast timeline in order to get listeners to convert to our platform. We had 2 objectives. 1, convert our regular listeners to the Radio-Canada Audio platform, and 2, attract new listeners. Initially, we decided that our most popular podcast would first be broadcast on Radio-Canada Audio exclusively before being offered on external platforms. Our first test was conclusive, showing record listening levels on our platform. In the past, most listening was done on external platforms, and now the proportion of listening on our platform is higher. Following this positive experience, we continue to implement our strategy, focusing on those that would be most profitable for us. Our goal was simple, to keep converting audiences on external platforms to Radio-Canada Audio. A good example is La Soirée est encore jeune, a highly popular talk radio program available on demand on external platforms. In the past, this program was offered on Radio-Canada Audio and external platforms at the same time. The program was a huge success on external platforms. It was the most downloaded program in our catalog with 10 years of content. Listeners' habits were well established. We asked ourselves why listeners would switch to Radio-Canada Audio from external platforms. The idea wasn't to lose listeners, but rather to convert them to our platform. So we decided to create value for our platform by offering the show exclusively for a short period on Radio-Canada Audio instead of distributing it widely everywhere at once. Now, the show is offered for 4 days exclusively on Radio-Canada Audio, and listening has grown by 120% on our platform. Were audiences happy with this strategy? Not really, but many converted because of their attachment to the radio show. Was the strategy accepted by everyone in our in-house team? No, but with a solid internal communication plan in which we explained the strategy, we were able to convince our teams. They understood that exclusivity was key to building our audience and to the entire platform's success. We also found we were mainly able to convert new listeners through original podcast production. While all podcasts used to be distributed at the same time on all platforms, there is now a 3-month exclusivity on Radio-Canada Audio. We saw that most listening occurred in the first 30 days, with a decreasing curve to the end of the 90-day period. Another interesting observation was that the consumption of original podcasts was different from on-demand radio content. Indeed, listeners tend to binge listen to original content. Original content still poses some challenges as it has a shorter lifespan, about 1 month, despite the months and months of work that go into these productions. The same challenges can be seen with original content offered by big players like Netflix. In January 2022, 2 years after the launch of Radio-Canada Audio, we were the second most popular platform for podcasts among French-speaking Canadians, right after Spotify. Our strategy is evolving, and we must continue to observe the market and consumers' habit in order to adapt and build on our success. Content is clearly king with our listeners. At the end of the day, our goal remains the same, to be the listening destination for French-speaking Canadians. We have to create value that doesn't exist elsewhere. Exclusive are key, as is having most of the catalog on Radio-Canada Audio by restricting the lifespan of properties on third-party platforms. So that was our strategy in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. And even if Radiodays Europe are not the Cannes Festival, you can easily access and talk to our speakers after if you're not having a question. And we're going to save some time at the end of this panel for a short Q&A session. Christelle, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your welcoming. Congratulations, Natasha. I'm here to talk to you about Radio France platform. As a preference, it's a jeu de mots. We would like Radio France to be a destination a reference in the audio market, but also a preference for our listeners. So 2020, we had more than 14 properties for our 7 brands, 7 apps, websites, and so. More than 1,000 shows on demand and 75 digital radios we still have there. And 2022, we made a big move with 3 main platforms. France Info, the big platform for global news in France, number 1. France Bleu, for all the local offer, news and services. And now Radio France as a public brand, which is new. It's an all-in-one for audio. Why do I say reference? We want our app and our websites and all our APIs best in class for the audio experience. It's about multi-channel circulation between France Inter, France Info, France Culture, Move, France Musique, and also FIP. We want our listeners to create playlists for life, and we want our listeners to conserve their playlists and in the next time that they can share with their communities. So we have an app designed specially for audio. We have no video and text in the app. We have now more than 1 million users each month. And we have a very new website offering text and videos in plus. Why preference? As Natasha said, if we want our platform to be a destination, we have to offer more than you have on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and so. And so we try to do some avant-première as at the Festival de Cannes. 7 days or 1 month or 3 days, we adapt it to the program. And we have a great discussion with our brand managers at Radio France. And we offer more more episodes rather than on the platforms. 10 plus years of Radio France programs, and it grows day after day. So more than 2 million episodes versus maximum 90 days on aggregators. We do some handmade editorial curation. We have a team with 5 to 6 editors that each day listen to the program, choose what they will show first, and so. And they also make the selection and all the sliders you can find on the app. And I would like to insist that it's not only about web and application, it's also about a service that we want to distribute on key environments. So here is the visual experience, but we also have to build a virtual experience of our app. And I think about voice assistants and cars, because in the next few years, people won't use an interface, visual interface, to discover our contents, but they will use their voice. They will use their natural language. So how will we make an editorial proposal with such experience? Just key metrics, not too many numbers. I'm not a fan of numbers. 2021, in average per month, we had 150 million online listenings per month. It's a podcast and live streams. I insist on voice assistants, and so I can show you our numbers. First time, I think. And in last year, we made 100 plus million plays on this environment, and it's a huge growth. What's next for Radio France? Of course, we would like our listeners to take a strong benefit to use their Radio France account, which is quite new and uncultural for us. We have to carefully maintain dialogue with CRM tools, notifications, in-app, newsletters, and so, but also on air. So we have to work with our on-air channels, so we find ways to speak about our platform. And we work on personalized recommendation experience, but not at same way as Netflix, and so, but with public service ethic about data, personal data, but also public service ethic about what we have to do as a recommendation. So our first step is to put some algorithm in the editorial choice. So we just play with it, and we go forward step by step. What is our ambition? As Radio Canada or maybe RTL, we want an audience rebalance between proprietary platforms and aggregators. It's an objective, very clear. We want to build a trusted and premium public service. Trusted is a very important word, and while the word is quite in a bad health, and it's very important for faith in information and in or recommendation for culture to be very recognized as something high quality proposal. And then we have a very high priority to develop a Radio France experience on voice and on cause. So we distribute direct, radio direct. Podcast is just the beginning. We are just finding some different ways with platforms to offer a podcast experience. And we also have discussions with cars manufacturers to invent what should be an experience for short journey or long journey with children, extra. So we are innovating. Merci.
Thank you, Christelle. You have to know that we all love numbers. You can judge that by the number of pictures taken during the presentation. Christian, you will have numbers too,
yes.
But more important than that, you've got conviction and a strong strategy for a commercial broadcaster who is one of the leaders in Germany.
Yes, I will show some numbers. I need my... We had this joke when we started that if they look scared and panicked, then we just have to wait.
Maybe we can give random numbers.
2 million.
2 millions.
And growing.
Thank you.
Ah, that looks familiar. So I actually start with numbers because I think when you think and set up your podcast or audio strategy, it's also good to see that we really are in a booming industry. And this is often forgotten by, let's say, traditional broadcasters like many of us are still. We are in a booming industry. The number of people using online audio is really increasing, and it's reaching mainstream. In Germany and elsewhere, it's really not a niche application anymore. It's really in the mainstream. And this is not only true to podcast and, let's say, new stuff, it's also true for radio. So these are numbers from Germany, and you see that even the, let's say, a bit linear, a bit lame live broadcasts of the radio stations are increasing significantly online. So it's not the case, and sometimes we have this impression that we are in a declining industry. We are really part of a booming industry, and given that, I think we can also develop our audio strategy with a position of strength and not from a position of a declining medium. And of course, I mean, the biggest growth rate and the kind of cool kid is podcast. And podcast, in many cases, especially for speech radios, like in France and Canada, it's equivalent for radio, but in many cases, of course, it's done, produced, distributed by new aggregators and new producers. So when we started to think and to rebuild our podcast strategy 3 years ago, we had some kind of an assessment and had some more general questions about the existing model. And the existing model in many cases is still that we produce, that we pay, that we curate original content and give it for free to other platforms. I mean, that's the basic model, and the only thing, and in many cases this is quite valuable, is reach. In many cases, and you know, many of the big tech companies do not share a lot of data. We have limited access to data. And as you know, from a sales perspective, but also from a content perspective, you need data in order to be able to develop your content further, to monetize on it. So we really had no access to data back then. And it's not only the case that you produce the content for free, you also deliver free promotion with it. So you produce it on your own, you pay all the costs, and you also promote these services on your existing platforms. You only get data if you get data about your own content. So we will never be able to see what happened after my episode of a podcast, what's a content journey on the platform, and what's the, let's say, structure or the structural behavior of my audience. This is just possible if you really have access to the platform. And something that is always a strength is that you are in charge of your content, how you present it, who finds it, when the content is available. And these are all limitations of the big platforms. So we made this assessment like in a good or bad relationship, and we had this growing feeling of, let's say, dependency, and we were not really convinced. So back then, 3 years ago, we decided not to limit ourselves on the content production part, but possibly let's try to get all the relevant parts of the value chain of podcasting, from A to Z. And the good thing is that RTL is part of a larger network. It's part of Bertelsmann. And we have many companies, many divisions, especially in Germany, across all media, with a lot of strong content and with a lot of existing audiences. And back then, everyone wanted to create podcasts and new audio. So what we did, we compiled all the audio departments, all the studios, all the editors, and so on, into one company and built an ecosystem. We called it the Audio Lines. This is the production house of RTL and Bertelsmann in Germany. We had the Ad Alliance as the big sales operation, and we founded Audio Now. And Audio Now is the podcast platform for Germany. It's owned by RTL, and it's the main distributor of RTL's and Bertelsmann content in Germany. And as we heard earlier, original content is really a key driver for usage on these platforms. But we also invited all the other publishers in Germany to be part of this platform. And the idea of the platform was not to have another Apple with all the existing podcasts in the world, but to really have a strongly curated selection of podcasts for a specific audience. So as you might see, it's very entertainment-driven. The look and feel alone appears to be a young and entertaining brand. So we really wanted to come up with a specific curation of content for an entertainment-driven young audience in Germany. That was the position and still is, and it distinguishes us from more serious platforms who deliver news and more hardcore content. And it gave us really a strong position in the German market. People really know what to expect on this platform rather than this endless pile of new podcasts. And what we did, we invited all the major publishers in Germany, the big let's say, more print and magazine-leaning organizations in Germany, but also other broadcasters. We had very long conversations, aka negotiations with the public broadcasters in Germany, and they also put their content on Audio Now. So as of now, I would say most of the big publishers in Germany are on Audio Now and distribute their content there, including the independent podcasters. And what we did as an exchange for the content of other publishers was that we promised to share data. So the deal was and still is that we team up with our, let's say, national partners to really offer the best content on Audio Now, and in exchange, everyone, of course, would get the corresponding data about the content, but also things we learned in terms of cross-content analytics, and everything we learned, we share with the publishers. And this is what we do now. So what we learned, and this is usually something you cannot get from any other platform, what's the profile of a typical user of Audio Now? We share this with all of our publisher partners. And it's quite interesting, and it's still growing. Audio Now is a very female-driven platform. So if you are in your late 20th, living in a big city in Germany, have some decent interest in entertainment, this is probably the platform you would favor, because it contains a lot of comedy, it has a lot of shows that corresponds with the content on TV. So we relatively quickly learned that it's a very young, very female listening platform. And this, by the way, adds a lot of value to other publishers, because this is a very nice and very hard to get kind of audience structure. What we also learned, and that is still the case, podcasting is still a metropolitan thing. So it's not that you are on the countryside and listen to podcasts in the morning after you spend your time in the mountains. Also, it's really a metropolitan thing. And if you look on the distribution in Germany, it's pretty much based in the big cities, so Berlin and Hamburg are leading. If you look at the more broader regions, it's also represented by the big population areas, especially in the area around Cologne and Düsseldorf, where I think 20% of Germans live, so it's really a metropolitan thing. What we also learned, and that's very useful data in order to share it with other publishers, is what are listening patterns on the platform. When do people explore content? When do people actually use content? And we can say now, in the beginning it was a bit different, but now Friday is really the prime day of podcasting. It's still relatively flat throughout the week, so it's not the case that nobody listens on a Monday or so, but Friday seems to be the day where all the big podcasts release their latest episodes, and it's also the day where most people think about their entertainment choices. This is, especially from a radio perspective, quite interesting. What's a typical listening behavior throughout the day? We don't have a prime time in the morning. We do have a very strong but flat development during the week, and then you see these high peaks in the evening. Many podcasters listen to their podcast while doing some personal stuff, cleaning up the room or doing other things they would like to be distracted. And the good thing from a radio perspective, this is very complementary to what we see on radio. So forget the scale. Of course, radio is still big in terms of reach, but we still have this morning show peak on most radio stations. We have this solid usage throughout the day. We have this, at least in Germany, lighter peak in the afternoon, and then it drops. And with podcasts, it's really the other way around. We have this peak in the late evening, and we have this hole in the morning. So it's very complementary. So what we expect, and Mathieu talked about what happened 3 years ago, what we probably expect next year or the next 2 years, is that this whole trend is becoming more and more mainstream. It's still slightly younger leaning, still a metropolitan thing, and we expect it to grow into slightly older audiences in terms of age groups, but also in terms of content topics. So becoming more, let's say, sports-driven, for instance, talking more about more mainstream, broader topics will be a trend we're anticipating. What we see, and this is not the focus of today, the monetization is still purely based on ads. And we see this changing with micropayments, with sponsoring, with corporate podcasts, with bundling. So this is something we really anticipate as a big change soon. And we see, and this is probably also from a broadcaster's perspective, very interesting, on-demand audio and streaming are merging. So podcasts are becoming parts of playlists, and they becoming kind of linear again. And especially, that's the last thing, we see a lot of strong short-form content coming more and more popular on these platforms, especially in combination with these streaming services. And this will also be our next step, that we develop more of these, let's say, more modular fragments of content. And the overall pattern is we see this growing and growing, and we are proud that we at least own a little bit of the distribution here with Audio Now. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, and thank you all three for giving us the ability to look what's under the hood inside the company. We've got some minutes for a Q&A. So who want to dive first? Who is the courageous one? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, I'm sorry I've forgotten your name, but from Canada. Initially, you, when you were putting exclusivity on your podcasts, you had them exclusive for 4 days. But then in the final slide, I saw that they're now exclusive for 3 months. Is that right?
In fact, for 4 days, it was on-demand radio show, and original podcast is 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah, it's different strategy for original podcast than on-demand radio show.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And also that there was some pushback within your organization to this.
Yeah.
I imagine that came from content makers who wanted the biggest audience possible.
Yeah.
Have you seen any difference in the total audience that you get for your podcasts with this new strategy?
It's hard to say, in fact, because we compare things that it's hard to compare. With download and real listening on our platform, we have more data. We know the duration of listening and everything. So, but it's I don't know how to say that, but it's quality listeners on our platform, and I think it's more important than have a lot of download, and we don't know who is downloading it and everything.
Sure. So data was the driver, one of them. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Another question? Okay, great. Yeah. At the end of the room. Thank you.
Hi. My question is for Radio France again. You mentioned that you have 1 million monthly users. Is that an organic growth? Did you promote externally only on your assets? Did you do something to gain this audience?
Yes, of course. Thank you for your question. So the 1+ million users are only for the app. I don't speak about our global audience or just digital audience. And yes, of course, we have to promote it massively and with classic ads on external platforms, of course. And we try to target, of course, of heavy listeners, but also communities with interests very next to our editorial proposal, cultural things, history, philosophy, news, extra. And one important part and one force for us is that it is promoted on air also, in the voice of the producers, with spots, but also in the voice of producers saying Application Radio France or radiofrance.fr or le site de France Culture, which is also radiofrance.fr. And it works. yes, but it's a lot of effort. It's my job with my team.
She has a bulletproof vest. Another one.
Hi, thank you so much. That was more for Christian and Christelle. You were talking about short forms podcasts, and Christelle, you were talking about consumption in smart speakers. So I'm working in Prisa, and we're having an amazing race on bulletin, I don't know how you say, news bulletin in smart speakers. I don't know if when you mention short form podcast, it's news bulletins or it's another kind of podcast. If you can talk about it, because for us it's been amazing and we don't know what to do with that, in fact.
Yeah, in many cases it's news. News is probably the main driver in any form of news in any length. And you're right, it's also on smart speakers because it's easy to access and easy to deliver. But we also see other areas. We see a lot of kind of practical information, things you would like to know, or one day in history. So these kind of smaller bits of information. And we also see a typical let's say, radio content, something like horoscope, something like weather. So it's very interesting to see that also these kind of traditional audio bits are becoming podcasts, and they really help in terms of getting awareness and reach across many platforms because they're easily to combine with platforms and easily combine with playlists.
To have to complete, thank you for your brilliant question. Yes, of course, it's about news. We see a big growth with France Info, short briefs of news on voice assistants. It's a big part of our growth. And well, if you ask the question, France Info, quelles sont les dernières actualités? Well, you have the direct streams, but you can also play chronicles or very 1 to 3 minutes briefings. But so voice is part of the growth of short formats, but also for kids, we have to think about it. At Radio France, we develop a big offer for kids, and there is long stories for bedtime, for example, but also for 5 minutes stories or musics, and that's also part of the short formats we develop, and that works very well.
And we have the very last question.
Hi, I'm Bala from Astro Radio. This question is to RTL. What is your revenue projection for next 5 years for the podcast? And the second question is, how much of that are contributed by the programmatic buying?
When it comes to monetization, I mean, I cannot really say numbers, but we still have a significant growth rate year on year. And especially compared to our existing inventory at the radio stations, TPMs are significantly higher. We're running on average CPMs around 100 euros now. Yeah, 100. And the programmatic part is still very tiny, honestly. We expect it to be bigger and bigger in the next 1 or 2 years, especially for radio, honestly. The percentage in radio now is 20%, and we expect it to be 50% within the next 2 years. So we think radio will be dominated by programmatic. For podcasts, we see a slightly smaller rate because the biggest chunk will be native commercials that are integrated into the podcast.
Thank you. And as there's no VIP area, you will have the luck to grab a coffee with our distinguished speaker just after this panel. I want to thank you all for having been great team player today.